You're listening to She's the Business podcast.
Did you know that podcast episodes are one of the best types of content to have out there for your business because they stick around, they're searchable, they last a long time. So that bit of time that you put into creating it is leveraged over and over and over again as more and more people discover that episode that you created. So if this year you've got a goal to maybe start your journey guesting on podcasts, or maybe even back of your mind, you've got an idea you might start your own podcast at some point, then today's episode, we're talking about what you should do, what you should not do, some of the biggest mistakes to avoid, but also some really great tips about how you can make this easy, how you can make it fun, and how you can just get started now, because what are you waiting for? It's time to share your message, get your voice out there. So stay tuned because this episode is coming right up.
Hi, I'm your host, Jessica Osborne, and over the last 25 years in marketing and business, I've helped many brands to launch, scale, and grow, with some of them becoming multi-billion-dollar companies. I'm here to inspire you to get out of your own way and create a profitable, fulfilling business while living the lifestyle you really desire, without all the hustle. So I bring you She's the Business podcast, a unique blend of strategies, tactics, mindset, health, and spirituality, literally everything you need to be the successful leader of your dream business. Made by women for women, this is your weekly dose of motivation and inspiration.
So today we're going to be talking about how to find the most aligned podcasts for you to guest on, and also what you can do to get started if you're interested in starting your own podcast. And my very special guest joining me to share all of her knowledge and wisdom, spill the beans on the secrets behind the scenes, is Candace Dudley. She is absolutely lovely, a teacher and a mother, entrepreneur. She hosts the Better Brave podcast, and she also provides services to others with podcast management, sustainable growth strategies. She's really become an expert in the podcasting space. So you're absolutely going to love this conversation because as two podcast hosts, we have a lot of experience between us, well over, gosh, she's done 160 odd. So over 400 episodes between us of experience in producing podcasts. And there's a lot of insight that comes from all of that time invested. So I know that you're going to enjoy this conversation as much as we did creating it for you. So without further ado, let me play this interview for you. The lovely Candace Dudley, who is the host of the Better Brave podcast. Welcome, Candace. I'm really happy to have you joining me here today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's really exciting. I always love to connect with other podcast hosts because, I think that we're on other sides of the world, but we have so many similarities and so much to talk about, and definitely a lot to share with our audience today, all about how you can, really get those great guest spots on podcasts, what to do, what to avoid. And I can't wait to start in on that. But could you tell us a bit more about you? I love to know the person behind the pod or the business. So what is it that you actually do? Who do you help? Tell me a bit about your business.
Sure. So I'm a mom of 3, and I used to be a teacher. And as I had my own babies one after the other, that's kind of what pushed me into entrepreneurship. I started to realize how exhausted I was at the end of each school day. And I just didn't really like that my kids were kind of getting my leftovers. So I loved teaching, but I didn't like that part. And so I started to dabble in different things, one being network marketing, which I'm not affiliated with anymore, but it's kind of was like my gateway into entrepreneurship, which I always think is interesting to hear how people get into entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
But within that, I started to lead accountability groups for other women, other moms specifically. And so that's how my podcast was born. And it's almost 4 years old now. I've since left the classroom. I've been not teaching for 3 years now. And have been supporting other women with podcasting, whether that's taking work off their plate and doing their edits and production, producing my own show. And then my favorite topic, which I know we're going to talk about today, is helping women find aligned podcasts to guest on and helping them kind of do that legwork and prep their speaking
Mm.
points for when they do that.
Yeah, amazing. I am really curious. Why podcasting? Like when you came out of teaching, how did you
Mm-hmm.
decide on podcasting as the area that you were going to specialize in? Or did it just sort of come about because you started a podcast? Like, tell me a bit about that.
Right. So there was a lot of pivots. I started my yeah, I started my podcast while I was still teaching, and my podcast has transformed since then. So it's more about
Mm.
highlighting entrepreneurial journeys and things like that, and also teaching to podcasting tips and things like that. But it really was what I noticed about a year or so ago, that even through burnout, even through all the changes and the pivots, there was a time during those years I was flipping furniture because that was my excitement,
Wow. Yeah,
my one
right.
thing. Like it's just very random, and one nudge after the other, another, trying to figure out what is
Mm.
it that I'm going to do because I'm
Hmm.
not teaching now, and what is next. And so there was this big kind of identity crisis and shift, I think, that I had to kind of shed and then step into. But I noticed when I looked back over all of that, I never stopped podcasting. It was the thing that
Mm.
I did every week, a new episode. I was excited about it. I never lost that passion for my own show. And that's when I realized, well, that was my thing. That was like where my heart lied. And it to me gives other women, especially, voices. That's the reason, one of the reasons I started was I didn't feel like other moms were talking about my experience. And so I wanted to,
Mm.
help another mom that was going through postpartum. At the time, that was the focus. But it was one of those things that just was like kind of a light bulb
Mm.
moment when you're like, what's next? What is it for me? I have all these skills now because I've been running my own business, and you would probably know, you learn the next skill and the next skill, and
Yeah.
you learn how to edit your podcast, and everything kind of builds from the big ground up. And so you had this skill set and started to realize that I could help people with this and I could build something with this. So
Mm.
yeah, it was definitely a light bulb moment day where it was like, oh, this is the thing that's never fallen away.
Yeah, that's so true. And I love that, it's like giving other women a voice and that whole premise, because I just feel so in tune with that. I think that was why I started my podcast in the first place. It wasn't because I want to listen to myself. In fact, I hardly ever listen to my own episodes because I'm
Yes.
like, I don't really like the sound of my own voice. That's fine if other people don't mind listening to it. But it was like, you know, I think that was me starting that business. And I'm just like you, like, gosh, there's so many parallels here. I had just had my second baby. Well, actually, I was already thinking of starting one as I was about to give birth to my second child. And I just been getting to that point where it was like, this environment that I'm in is so not conducive to, I guess, me being a great mother, like you say, not rushing home at the end of the day at work and having those last moments where everybody's tired and cranky, trying to get them into bed, and that being it. And I was like, I'm missing all the best parts, but I don't want to give up my career either. And it was so weird because this old corporate world was just like, no, you have to choose. It's either career or kids. You can't have both. And I think it was like that whole, like, ooh, you've just given me a challenge. Like, what? You've just told me that I can't have a career and do what I love and be a good mom and have the time with my kids. And I just thought, well, screw you all. Like, I don't often say things like that on podcasts, but, that was what I was thinking. Like, well, I am going to prove you wrong. And, that was the moment for me that, it really nailed the impetus to go, I'm doing this and I am not coming back. But I think, you have those wobbles, like you say, and like, I started off, and it was the year later when I was coming back, my maternity leave. I took maternity leave. I thought, well, maybe I'll need to come back. The safety net's still there. Coming back, they were like, oh, I think you're going to want to take a demotion because, now you've got 2 kids. And that was the nail in the coffin for me. I was like, I am done. I am never stepping foot in this place or any other place like this ever again. And it was like, that is it. And I just thought so many women have that trouble to, they just get told what's possible for them and what's not. And why is that? Like, it's so ridiculous, right? Like, why can't you be able to manage both? The people who worked in my team who were mothers were honestly my best staff. They had the least amount of time. They were the most productive, the most efficient, smart. Like, they got everything done. It was the people who had all the time that didn't get stuff done. So I was like, stop telling women that they can't do this. Like, please. And even though I made that choice, I know that there's plenty of women who do stay in their jobs. And I thought, it doesn't matter what you choose to do. I just think you should be allowed to make that choice yourself and not be told. But anyway, sorry, I've got up on my high horse all about that.
I couldn't agree more. I agree.
Yeah. And so I just love, you said about starting a podcast, really sharing your experiences and saying some of the conversations that needed to be said. What do you think, when you think about giving your podcast or giving people a voice through your podcast, what are some of the premises that you have behind that? What makes it successful as a podcast when you're coming up with a concept for it?
Sure. For me, it really started with this nudge, and it was about a year long. And that's another reason I'm so passionate about helping people get their podcast set up and going, because it doesn't need to take that long. But I just kept having this nudge on my heart that I was supposed to do this. I loved listening to podcasts, and I felt like I had some things to say. I was huge into personal development and reading books and things like that. And so I just wanted to share stuff that was happening with the moms in my community, my virtual community that I had hosted. And I think for people starting out, if you have that nudge, then you don't always know why you're supposed to follow it. I didn't know that I was going to end up here when I started, but there is something that you're going to learn along the way. There's a new door that's going to open, and you kind of have to have a little trust at the beginning of, I'm going to follow this. A lot of doubts that people have are they're going to run out of things to say.
Yes.
Stuff like that, or who am I to be talking about this, and that still comes up every once in a while, but that's why you have to work on your mindset. I always tell people the first thing you're going to do when you start your podcast is start working on your mindset, because you're going to have those days where you're not going to want to hit record because that doubt's going to creep in. But trusting that someone needs to hear your words and specifically your take on this and your story, not mine, because there's so many people in the world that someone needs you specifically. And that's kind of what I tried to, in the beginning, when I was so nervous, I tried to flip it around and say, kind of, instead of me, I'm nervous. What are people going to think about me? What if I could help one mom that feels lonely at home? What if I could help this person? So kind of flipping that switch is also helpful in the beginning to get going.
Yeah. And I think a lot of women especially feel really nervous about, getting on a podcast and speaking because of that. I guess none of us like the sound of our own voice. We don't want to look at ourselves. We don't want to listen to ourselves. And it's interesting because, you might say, well, you're a teacher, and so they might think, well, you're used to speaking in front of people. But tell us a bit about how you felt, even though you had that background and that experience of standing up and, and speaking in front of people all the time. How did it change for you when you were thinking about starting a podcast? Was that a good background to have? Or
Well, yes and no, because sometimes, because I like to teach and I know how to present things in a teacher way, sometimes, you can feel like you're the teacher, but really I'm speaking to my peers on a podcast typically, or so it's different. Because I spoke to kids, right? I was like 4th grade, 6th graders. That was my jam. So, but it is helpful because you have a lot of reps of speaking, and but you just have to let yourself in the beginning be a beginner too. No one hits record on episode 1 and has like perfect speaking. I mean, we still don't. And so you have to let yourself get better and learn. But your people will follow, and they will love to see your journey from start to finish. Like, I still have my first episodes out there. People can go see them. They're unedited because I didn't know how, but I was like, this is not going to be the thing that holds me back any longer. I'm going to get this published, and then I'll figure out the next thing. So, just allowing yourself to take things one step at a time and be a beginner, and having a little grace with yourself goes a long way, especially in the beginning, because you might also not know what exactly you want your podcast to be about. It's okay that it transforms. It's okay that it ebbs and flows with different topics. The more specific you can get, the better conversions and things you'll have ultimately from, listeners to potentially having clients. But you also need some room for the repetition and the practice too, and you hone in on what that thing is for you, and your specialty and your speaking skills get better
Mm.
and better the more you keep hitting record and keep going at it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so important. And I think, something came up for me as you were speaking then. It's like this whole idea that you had to be something else, or, that you've got to be able to speak or a background in speaking to do a podcast. And it's like, well, hang on, you have been speaking your whole life. If
Yes.
someone's sitting there going, I'm too afraid, I don't have I haven't been someone who's spoken in front of people or whatever, and I was that person, right? I did marketing, and you'd think marketers are people who are out there doing promotion. I'm like, no, I was in the background. I worked for corporations. Like, I was the person behind the computer writing the copy, and they'd ask me to speak at a company conference, and I would get the absolute shakes, and I would be thinking, I don't want to do this at all. Like, that is not my comfort zone. I did not want to stand up on the stage. And I think everyone always found that really odd, because they thought, well, aren't you the marketing person? You should be the person who can speak. And that's not the case. But
No.
It's like, we're all people. We've been speaking our whole life. So it's more like, well, can you have a conversation with someone?
Mm-hmm.
And if you can have a conversation, if you actually can put some words together and just have a conversation with any person, doesn't matter who, then you can speak on a podcast, because it's just the fact that it's being recorded. And I think that that's one of the things I always try so hard when I've got a guest who's new to podcasting, is like, just relax. We're just having a chat. You don't need a script to read off. Please don't, in fact, because it just sounds so robotic. Let's just have a chat, and it's just normal. It's speaking. And as long as we have a topic in mind and we've got something that we're talking about, then, it does come together and it does create some powerful content.
Right.
What other things do you think stop people from either starting podcasts or even guesting? Because I think sometimes maybe being a guest might be your very first step into that podcasting world. You could actually test out whether this is for you or not by doing some guest slots, right? Would that be something that you would say to people?
Oh, yes. Guesting is a great way to dabble in it and see if you even enjoy, like you said, talking and being on a show. The other part that I think holds people back is thinking that they have to be like a certain rank, or like they've had to hit this certain mark. I find that a lot. I know that was part of my story. It took me, I bet I was 100 episodes in before it was like, I'm a podcast producer. I was thinking that I needed a certain amount of following, or I needed to make a certain amount of money or clients, and then you just realize that it's really important of how you're speaking. So if you have recorded an episode, you've published an episode, start calling yourself a podcaster. It's really important, I think, to step into that new identity, even if you don't feel like it's you yet, because I found myself a year out of teaching still answering the question, hey, what is it that you do? Saying, I used to be a teacher, when really I should have been, it was just that identity. So if that's relatable to someone listening, start there. Start with how you talk about yourself, because that's going to just also shift your confidence in start saying that you're a podcaster, start saying that you're a podcast producer. If you've done a show start to finish and publish it, you're now a podcast producer. If you run for one day, you're a runner. Like, there isn't actually this bar that we have to hit to be this thing. No. We just get to be it. And I think that also just goes a really long way in just embracing this new thing.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, who is actually going to give you permission to say, no, you are now a podcast producer, or you are now a podcaster? There is no prerequisite. There is no number, no milestone. It is whatever you've conjured up in your head, which actually means it's just you holding yourself back from being it. And I love that you've mentioned this, because it's like that identity shift. It doesn't matter. Adopt it on day one and start calling yourself it. How much better and more successful do you think you're going to be at staying consistent with your show, at following through, at being, really shining out on a podcast, whether you're a guest or a host, if you actually adopt that identity right from the beginning. And so, it doesn't matter if you're still new and it's still something that you're learning, because I think everybody's learning. We're all still learning how to do it. Today, starting
Yes.
this one, I was like, I need to send you the link. And here we are, I'm 230 odd episodes in. You would think I'd have this all down pat by now. And normally my
Yes.
podcast process is great, but I hadn't sent Candace the link. So I had to send her the link to join the room. But that's fine, it's like, well, that's just another little lesson for me to make sure my processes are
Yeah.
airtight and all in place and happening. But I'm interested to talk a bit about guesting, because I think this is where, we're assuming that a lot of people listening aren't hosts of their own podcast, but they would like to, start dabbling in guesting, and maybe even if you are a host, but you don't do much guesting, you want to do more guesting, then I think there could be some really great advice and tips that we could share about how you can be a really great podcast guest. So where do you even start? If you're like, right, I want to guest on podcast, that's your idea and your goal. And you might say, I want to, get on 3 or however many, whatever number it is that you've decided. What then? Where do you begin?
Right. So I think where you start is you share on your social media or with your email list. You share with those platforms the specific things that you would love to talk about. So in thinking about guesting, you want to back up and think about what offers do you have what is your offer? Maybe you have more than one that is like your dream client. That would be the best case scenario if you would be able to convert someone to that. So then you kind of back up and say, okay, then what would I need to talk about on a show to showcase that I am an expert in this area? And don't get hung up on expert too. That's another thing. Someone's always going to know more than you, but your people are looking for you to get them to where you are. So you don't have to worry about, I need to know more before I have to reach a certain thing. You do not. You're just going to start where you are, and you're going to share where you are at that moment in time. But if you can get specific on the things that you want to talk about, maybe 2 or 3, and share that with the world, share that with the social media platforms that you're on. And that way, if a podcast host like us are scrolling and we see a topic, we can then say, yes, you sound like a fit, or let's talk more. So definitely start there, because that's the easiest first step to just like get it out into the universe. Because who knows if someone is watching it or your friend didn't know you wanted to do that, but they know you just never know the interconnectedness of the people that are looking at your thing. So start there. But then if you want to take it a step further, and people like me, and there's others out there. So if you don't feel a connection with me, then go find someone that you do. But there's people that help with this. But the process I like to do is go on and look at podcasts and listen to bits of their episodes and things. And so I have a tracker that I put these in, because maybe I'll find a show I'm like, oh, I really relate to this host or this topic, and I see that they take guests. And so I might put then in my show, link the show, find the host if I can. Usually it's pretty easy to find the host, and some type of email or some way to reach them through social media. And I'll put all that in my tracker. And that kind of ends up being like a breadcrumb, because maybe that host had someone else on the show that you're like, oh, I love their guest episode. Well, they might have a podcast too. Jump over to their show and then keep going. So, you can search on podcast platforms too. So you definitely do that. You might just get like some huge podcasts though. So it's kind of nice if you can find some smaller ones to start with and get into that world, because it's almost like there's just these ripple effects that just like happen one after the other once you start down this guesting journey. Because then, if a host really loved you, then they're like, you should talk to my podcaster friend because she has a show about this. But yes, I put all that in a tracker. And then if I find an application, some people have applications, some don't. I link that in the tracker too. And I can give you that link. It's like $7 for a little guesting bundle that I have. If that is something that people are really serious about, it's a good place to start. But I also have like a media sheet editable template in there for people to just kind of fill out. A little bit about themselves, and then those topics that they could speak or email to those podcasts then that are on your tracker that you're like, okay, now I'm ready to get these emails out and reach out to them or DM them. But when you do that, I think this is the biggest part is you can't pitch somebody to be on their show if you haven't listened to their podcast. You probably get pitches all the time through email. So do
Mm-hmm.
I. And you can tell
Mm-hmm.
really fast when it's a copy paste, or they don't spell your name right, or you can tell they listen to like one show. And so they say something about that, but you know, the rest is completely unaligned and doesn't fit your audience. And so then that's just
Mm-hmm.
like, doesn't feel good as a host to get that. So you for sure want to listen to, you know, you don't have to binge their whole podcast, but you want to know different pieces and different parts and know them enough where you can send them a really genuine message and also say why or how you would provide value for their audience, because really this is about serving people, right? Podcasts are free for people
Yeah.
to listen to. And so we're leading
Mm-hmm.
with that service heart and how can I provide value to your audience? You know, if they've already had 3 people on talking about podcasting and podcast guesting, you're probably not going to pitch them because they can't do that to their audience, you know? But then I
Yeah.
just say, send the email, send the DM, shoot your shot, because the worst that can happen is they say no, they might ghost you. But lots of
Mm.
people will say, yeah, let's do this. This sounds great. And if you mentioned if you're a host, then it's a lot even easier, because if you like them enough to pitch them to be on their show, likely you might want them on your show. So
Yeah.
then that tends to be really a simple thing
Mm.
that you can just shoot off a quick DM and say, hey, you know, do we want to do a swap? But
Yeah.
that's kind of, yeah. So I kind of think about it as like doing it organically, where you just start posting on social media that this is what you're looking to do and share that. But then you can do it a little more structured too, where you're actually taking time to search for shows, put them in a tracker, then on a,
Mm.
you know, the next day, then send those pitches. I also like to say, when you are going to send those messages, like do it on a good day where you're like high vibe, like you want to have good energy
Yeah.
when you're going to send that. You don't want to have those days where you're like, oh, I'm tired and I don't want to talk to anyone. Don't do it on those days. Just fill out your tracker on those days,
No.
right? Because you want to be
Yeah.
like, oh, in such a good energy when you do that. But yeah, that's kind
Yeah.
of my
It's so
process.
true. And it's like it's the invisible thing, right? You can't kind of, you're not saying energy in words, but it's just the way that you will put something together when you're feeling high energy and when you're feeling really positive and you know you're being really genuine, like you said, is so important. We can feel and see that, and it's not
Yeah.
in the words that you write so much, it's just in the whole way that it's put together, and it comes
Yeah.
through so strongly. And yeah, that is just great advice. I think the other thing you said about being specific about your topic, number one most important thing, like how often I
Mhm.
might go onto Threads, and I think that's where we met actually, but
Yeah.
yeah, like I'll see posts on Threads of someone going, I've got a goal to go on 10 podcasts this year. Who wants me as a guest? And I'm like, you haven't said
Yeah.
anything about, like, even, it doesn't even matter so much who you are. Like, what do you want to talk about? We don't even know whether you would be a good fit. And no podcast host is literally going to sit there and go, oh, hang on, let me do 15 minutes of research on you and go and like look at you and who you are and what you talk about and then come back and say, yes, I want you on my podcast. Like, no, we're not doing that. You do the work, like figure out what it is that you want to talk about, get specific, and
Hmm.
then put it out there and even know who it is that you're wanting to reach. It's like not all podcasts are going to be a good fit for you.
Right.
You know, you've got to kind of do that yourself. And I really do think that anyone who's not willing to do that, then you're not ready to be a guest on a podcast,
Right.
because
I would agree.
that host is inviting you into their space. This is something that, you know, they are putting their effort and energy into, and so much more than just the time of the interview. There's a lot of time that
Oh
I'm
my
sure
gosh.
Candace can talk
Yes.
to that happens behind the scenes. Like, be respectful of that, you know, and I
Hmm.
do see, sometimes I get, you know, I don't know if you see them as well, and you know, Threads is such a great place where you see these conversations happen, but someone going, you know, oh, podcast hosts should be glad to have a guest. They're giving their time for free. And I'm like, yes, but you don't realize that there is so much more time the podcast host is investing into that episode. The guest is the person who, yes, they're giving their time for free, but they're actually getting exposure on someone else's platform.
Yes.
Plus that person's doing all the work to provide it. So please have a bit of thought and be really respectful of it. You know,
Yes.
you need to come to the party with more than
Yes.
just showing up in the moment.
For sure. Oh, I see that too. And, you know, posts like that, you're saying like, I have a goal of this. You're not leading with service. Like, what is the value you're providing? How are you helping others? That's an all about you post. And like you said, as a host, we're not going to click on your profile to find out if you'd be a good fit. But if you listed 3 topics, which I think you listed that you were looking for certain specific things for guests for your show, and that's how I read it and was like, I think I could fit that mold. And I think that's how this started. So yeah, just thinking
Yeah.
about your value you can provide. But you're totally right. A guest episode is way more work put into a guest episode as a host and production standpoint than
Mhm.
a solo one. There's
Yeah.
scheduling, there's edits, there's social media. I mean, there is a lot that's happening, and you just get to show up at the recording and then you leave and you're done. The other thing, if you're going to guest, you need to be ready. If you say yes to being on someone's show, you need to share their show. You need to share the episode. I've had people come on
Yes.
years ago and not share it, not say anything about it. Share
Mhm.
it. That's the host has spent possibly years building their audience that knows, likes, and trusts them. And so by having you on, they are like vetting you and saying, I trust this person to put them in front
Mhm.
of my audience. Like, I feel like it's such a big sacred deal. And if you aren't at that
Yes.
level of like, that's how you're going to treat it, then yes, you're probably not
Mhm.
ready to start guesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I recall like one guy one day, and I think I had to reply to him because he was saying like, "Oh, a guest doesn't need to share the episode." I'm like, "Why are you guesting? If you do not want to share the episode that you spoke on, what are you doing? Like, this is not
Yes.
free. It's not free marketing. Like,
No.
in a way it is, but you've got it. You're part of it, right? You're on the
Yes.
team. It's a collaboration. It is not a
Yes.
service someone's providing to you. And I just was like, who is this guy? I am not on the same, he's not on the same planet as the rest of us. But anyway,
No.
that was him. So what are some of the, let's kind of talk about some of the big mistakes to avoid, because I always think it's good to know ahead of time, because you may not know what is a mistake, purely just of lack of experience.
Sure.
But if we can talk about, let's sort of say, apart from what we've already discussed, is there anything else when you're being a guest, what should you avoid, just so that, you have a really good experience and it turns out to be a great investment of your time as well?
Definitely. Well, definitely practice and have an idea in mind. Everybody's going to ask you in the beginning of an episode to share about, either about your journey or how you got to where you are or who you are and who you help. And you don't want that to be a 5+ minute answer, because let's say like my shows are about 25 minutes long. They're quick hitters. You've just now taken almost a quarter of the episode just on that. The host will ask follow-up questions, but that sometimes is where people aren't precise. They want to tell you the whole ins and outs. Obviously, there's a lot to life and things happen and the stories are fascinating, but that might not be why you're on the show, to speak. That might not be the point of your episode. And so make sure that is practice and concise, and just share the pieces and highlight the pieces that are really important. The other thing is, oh no, I can't think. I lost my train of thought. Oh, mom brain settling in here.
It's your evening at the end of a long day, and like the kids are in the other room, and you're probably thinking, please stay in there and don't come knocking on the door. But maybe it's be in a nice quiet place.
Yes, it came back to me. Trying to talk about everything. You might have, like I have a client right now, we're working together. I'm looking for shows actively for her, and she has like 5 amazing free offers. They're all amazing, but they're all different. A mistake would be to go onto an episode in one single episode and mention all of them, because it's just not going to convert. You're not going to feel like, oh, you're the expert in this and this. It's going to go a lot better of conversion rate, or even just getting people to follow you or position yourself like as an expert, if you kind of have one main thing that you can share on that episode. It doesn't mean you don't have other. It just means it's one episode, so you can't. Trying to talk about too many things at once can definitely be a mistake. So thinking that through of like, what would be your best case scenario if somebody got done with the episode and they're like, I loved this guest, I want to go download her free offer. Like, which one is that? And maybe do you need to combine some of them, or do you need to rework that a little bit so that leads to where you want, to lead to? So giving that some thought too is really helpful.
Yeah. And I think, just to add on to that, it's like thinking about the ones that are, going to have some longevity in them. Like it's not your offer that's happening just this next month and then it's done, because your podcast episode is out there and it's going to be consumed for maybe years into the future. So I know we don't know with a crystal ball what is going to happen in 2-3 years time, but try to choose something that you think, well, this is one of the core pieces of my business. It's going to be around in some form or another.
Definitely, because the nice thing about podcasts is that they are long form and they're searchable. So that, take advantage of that. And the, like you said, the longevity of them. It's different than a social media post.
Yes. Yeah. So and you don't always have the podcast episode published straight away after an interview as well. Right. So, I'm always thinking, right, well, anything that I share when I'm a guest is something that I know is I've got in my business, and or it's coming and it will be there, but I know that it'll be live long before the episode airs. So, there's just some little things there, but I think they're kind of logical, right? As long as you are aware of them. That's really great. Is there anything that you wish you'd known before you started? If you could go back to past you, or maybe when you were starting out, and give yourself the biggest piece of advice, what would that be?
I think just don't overcomplicate things, and just don't fall into the trap and the excuse that I just need to learn one more thing. I will start this once I Google it some more, or I research it some more. That is just keeping us stuck where we are. Hitting record on your first podcast episode, I guarantee you will learn more than any Google search by just doing that. So the action, unfortunately, comes before the confidence. We wish it was the other way around, that the confidence happened first, but it doesn't. So take the messy, inspired action, lean into those inspired moments, because that's really where your alignment is. And that's how you're going to just find the right path to be walking down. Because we don't get to know, like you said, we don't have a crystal ball, and we don't get to know the future. And sometimes we wish, in entrepreneurship, sometimes if you had those days, you're like, well, someone just tell me what to do. I just wish I just knew the direction of what to go, but we don't. So I always say, just lean into when you do feel really inspired, lean into that. Oh, I need to, pop into your head of a podcast episode to record. Go find a way to record it, or send yourself a voice note, because there's something there that's leading you to the next thing. So having some trust in that, and letting yourself take that action will go a really long way, because perfect, done is better than perfect, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think I recorded on Zoom for at least the first year. And then,
definitely.
Start and then changed. It's like, just, do what you can with what you've got. It doesn't have to be perfect. People are more interested in what you've got to say. And I think one of the things, you were talking before about being practiced and putting in, you've done the time and speaking in front of people. And it's like, if you don't feel like you've done the time and you're really nervous about it, just think of what ways can you practice? What could you do? Going live on social media, I think is way more terrifying than than doing a podcast episode, because this isn't even live. Like it's recorded, it'll be put out there. But even just doing something like that, imagine you just make yourself do that consistently for a few weeks, how much you'll grow in that confidence of like, well, actually I can speak on the fly, on the, live, and then doing a podcast episode, you're going to have a lot more confidence in yourself and your ability to say something that
definitely
matters.
It's just stretching your comfort zone a little bit each day. For me, way 8 years ago in the beginning, it was talking on my stories on Instagram. I was terrified, but the more you do that, and then if you have the guts to watch it back, you start to see, maybe you always start with this, like, or like you notice some of your patterns, and then once you're aware of them, don't beat yourself up about them. Just, you can notice them, and then you can try to improve them. And but stretching that comfort zone, just kind of like a little bit each day. If it's talking on social media, like you said, do that. And then who knows, maybe it will lead to a podcast.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the stories is such a great idea, right? Because first of all, it lasts for a day. So even if you don't like it or whatever, it's gone. And you can actually delete it if it was a complete stuff up, whatever. You don't even have to post it. Like it's gone into the mist of time.
Right.
If you decide not to publish it. So it's like, don't be afraid of it. I think it's do that, and that will really give you a good grounding in feeling okay about speaking, because it's like, it doesn't matter that it's not on a podcast. It's really just getting some practice of talking and saying something, sharing what's on your mind, what's in your heart, and what better place to do that than on your social media platform. And speaking of which, where can people find you? That's a really nice segue into there. Yeah, where can people find you?
Yes, everything is at my name, Candace Dudley. So on Instagram, at Candace Dudley, Threads. I'm also over on LinkedIn, but most active on Instagram and Threads. And then my website is CandaceDudley.com. So you can find me there.
Amazing. That's so cool. I'll link you up in the show notes. It sounds like you've got so much to share. I really, I loved what you have said today about, everything to do with podcasting. There's been a lot of gold in there. So I hope that if you're listening today and it's been something of interest for you for a while, that you've taken some of these gems that Candace has shared and got them down and maybe started feeling a bit motivated to take some action. 2025 could be your year to finally launch yourself into the podcasting space. And, that doesn't have to be big and scary. It might actually just be doing some guest episodes, which are a whole lot of fun. I love these conversations. So
yes. Thanks so much for having me. I just appreciate that we could do this, and I can't wait to have you over on my show.
Yes, likewise. And I'll make sure that we have all of that hooked up. So Candace's podcast is Better Brave, and that will be here in the show notes. So scroll down, check her out, go over to Instagram and connect and say hi. But thank you so much for your time and for sharing all of your amazing wisdom with us today, Candace.
Oh, thank you. Yes.